Whoops, not what I wanted to do. This is what I wanted to do. Okay, last lesson, lesson 6, analyzing arguments. So a logical argument, now, again, this isn't like two people fighting about something. This is a technical, by definition, logical argument, is a set of statements that are made up of premises and conclusions. Okay? We've heard that term before. Again, premise is kind of like the hypothesis. All right, the first part, conclusions, the second part. We keep using different verbiage for it, but it's the same idea. The first part, the second part. Okay? A premise is a statement in the form of either conjunction, disjunction, negation, or conditional. So these are new terms. Okay, these are brand new terms. We will be going over, okay, what they mean. And then an argument is either valid or invalid. Notice, not saying true or false, valid or invalid. And there's going to be justifications and rules for this, and we'll have charts and everything to go by. It seems kind of scary at first, but it's really not that bad. Just got to get into it. Okay? So, just because an argument is valid by the rules of logic does not necessarily mean it's true. So in other words, you could pose a really good argument and logically defend a false statement. Okay? In logic, truth and validity are not necessarily equivalent. This is kind of an important concept. Okay? Valid does not mean true. True does not mean valid. They're not tied together. You can have a true statement and poorly defend it and not be able to, make a valid argument for it, even though it's true. Okay? So, it is possible that a set of true statements may lead to an invalid argument. Okay? Likewise, it's possible that a set of false statements could lead to a valid argument. It's also possible that a valid argument has a false conclusion, and an invalid argument can have a true conclusion. So, key concept is they're not tied together. All right, so example 1. We have premises, the facts. All right, we have a crime was committed. A person was found at the scene of the crime. The person had a gun. What's the conclusion? That person committed the crime. Okay, so you might go, hey, you're here, there's a crime, you got a gun, you're guilty. That's your conclusion. But just because a person is found at the scene of a crime holding a weapon does not necessarily mean the person committed the crime. This argument would be considered invalid, a fallacy, even if the person actually did commit the crime. So think about it, just like the police showing up, all right, and then going to trial. Just because that person is there and has a gun in their hand does not mean they committed a crime. All kinds of things could have happened. Okay, say it was a murder. There's a murder, someone in the other room walks in, stupidly goes, oh my God, picks up a gun, and the cops walk in. Well, they didn't commit the crime, but it looks like they did based on the circumstantial evidence of the situation. Now, in that situation, the conclusion that they committed the crime would end up being wrong. Okay? So it'd be a fallacy. But it could have been the cops walked in and found the murderer with the gun in their hand still. They are assumed to be guilty, and they end up being guilty. But just because they assume that does not mean it's true or false. All right? So based on that, their argument is a fallacy. All right? The assumption that they're guilty is a fallacy. Now, that fallacy could lead to a true or false, like a conviction or non-conviction. So again, the two are not tied together. So we accept or assume premises as if they were true or correct for the sake of argument. All right? And then determine whether the conclusion is valid or not based on those premises. All right. So let's look at this. Determine if the following argument or arguments are valid or invalid based on the fallacy. Now I'm going to be throwing some terms at you that we're going to be learning here in a little bit, but just talk about it. So if I receive an invitation to the party in the mail, I will go. Okay? So we have an if-then, right? So here's we know about if-then, the arrow, right? This is my P, and this is my Q. So if this happens, I will go. If-then. All right? Well, I did receive an invitation in the mail. I went to the party. Okay? So these right here are my premises. And this is my conclusion. So if I receive an invitation, I'm going to go. I got an invitation, I went. Okay? This is a valid argument. And it's by something called modus ponens. It's a weird word. It's Latin. We'll get into what it means in a second. Modus ponens. M-O-D-U-S-P-O-N-E-N-S. Modus ponens. It is a valid argument. If this happens, then this will happen. This happened, so that happened. Okay? Kind of makes sense. It's kind of like, oh, that makes sense. That's kind of an obvious thing. All right. Number 3. Determine if this one is. If I receive an invitation to the party, so that's my P, then I will go. That's my Q. I did not go to the party. Notice this is tied into my Q, so this would be a not Q. I did not go. So again, these are my premises, and this is my conclusion. The conclusion is I did not receive an email. an invitation. So that's not P. So let's just think about this logically. If I receive the invitation, I will go to the party. I didn't go to the party must mean I didn't get an invitation. Well, no. I could have gone, or I could have got an invitation and not gone. I could have not got an invitation and still gone. There's different possibilities here. Just because I didn't go to the party does not mean I didn't get an invite. I may have gotten an invite and gotten sick. I may have gotten an invitation and had all the other plans. Okay? So these two do not, necessarily mean true, but based on logic, this is called valid by modus tollens. M-O-D-U-S-T-O-L-L-E-N-S. So think about it. Even though I'm talking about something that I could go, wait a minute. Just because I didn't go to the party does not mean I did not get an invitation. That could be very true. But based on pure logic, this is a valid argument. Based on the very concrete thing of, if I get an invitation, I'm going. Since I didn't go, means I didn't get an invite. Again, real world, no. There's plenty of other possibilities here. But based on pure logic, this is a valid argument. Truth doesn't matter. Okay? Number 4. We're back to the same thing still. If I receive an invitation, there's my P, then I will go. There's my Q. I did not receive an invitation. That's not P. I did not go. That's not Q. This is invalid. And it's called fallacy of the inverse. And again, these are a lot of terms being thrown at you, but we'll be practicing this and going over it more and more. And again, the hard part about this is not learning the structure. The hard part, honestly, is, for most people, is getting away from the whole idea of true or not true. Were there other options or not other options? That doesn't matter. We're talking about specific rules of logic. So number 5, we're back to the same thing. P, then Q. That's a Q. I went to the party. That's a Q. Again, these are my premises. That means I did receive an invitation. Okay. Now, this one is invalid by the fallacy of the converse. Think back to geometry, converses when you switch them. Okay. And again, think about it. I went to the party. You could have crashed the party. Doesn't mean you got an invitation. You could have known you were invited, but it got lost in the mail. You don't know. Okay. Again, not whether it's true or false or whether it makes sense in practical world. This is based on logic. In this situation, it does not guarantee. It's not a valid argument. Okay. So we have here rules of symbolic logic. So for valid arguments, we have these two rules, which you saw from the notes, modus ponens and modus tollens. And invalid is either fallacy of the converse and fallacy of the inverse. And again, you don't have to write this down. I didn't write this above because it's just redundant. But these are the structures of what we just did. So modus ponens means if P then Q, P, that's our other premise, leads to Q. That's valid. Modus tollens is if P then Q, not Q, we can conclude not P, also valid. So these are the structures, the breakdowns of that. And then the fallacies of converse and inverse, we have if P then Q. Just because we have Q does not guarantee P. So that's an invalid argument. And then here, if P then Q, not P does not necessarily give you not Q because there are alternatives. Also, real quickly, you can also abbreviate these instead of writing this all out with just MP and MT. Okay. So, number 6, yes or no? If I get a D, I will drop out. Okay. So now we've learned what the symbols are. That's P then Q. I didn't drop out. Okay. Dropping out is my Q. If I didn't drop out, that's not Q. I did not get a D. Again, getting a D is my P. That's not P. So all we do is look back and see which one matches. And that would be this one right here. P then Q, not P. P then Q, not P. So we just say valid by MT, modus tollens. That's our rule. So now we're just practicing applying this. So for B, if I get a D, I'll drop out. So again, that's a very simple P then Q. I dropped out. That's my Q. That's a positive Q. I got a D. That's positive P. So PQ, QP. So we just look back. PQ, QP. That is invalid by the converse. Okay? So invalid. Fallacy of converse. And if you want to abbreviate, FOC, fallacy of converse, fine with that. Instead of writing all those words. I'm also going to give you a chart with all these on it. So, same thing, just a different situation. If I fall off my bike, I will get hurt. So if I fall, then I will get hurt. So fall, hurt. I fell off my bike. Well, that has to deal with the premise. That's my P. My conclusion is I got hurt. So if P then Q, P occurred, therefore Q occurred, that's valid by modus ponens, MP. You can kind of see where this is going. We're doing one of each, so you can almost guarantee what the next one is. So if we win our last game, then we'll get pizza. We did not win our last game, so that's not P. We won't get pizza, not Q. This is probably one of the toughest ones because you're thinking, well, but logically, just because we didn't win doesn't mean we didn't get pizza. I could have bought it on my own. Coach could have been like, oh, I feel bad for you guys. All those could have happened, but based on pure logic, this is invalid by the fallacy of the inverse. Fallacy of inverse. And again, if you want to just abbreviate it, FOI, I'm fine with that. Saves a little time. Now, new terms to put in the mix. Something called a disjunctive syllogism, which is or statements. Okay? So that's why we have our, our little V. Remember, that's an or. Okay, whenever we have the V, that's or. So this says P or Q. It's not an if then, it's P or Q. Right? So I will either clean my room or go to the movies. I didn't clean my room. I went to the movies. That'd be like an example of that. Or I clean my room or go to the movies. I didn't go to the movies. I cleaned my room. So that's kind of like how you would apply that. So let's see what happens here in 9. I either have a quarter or I have a nickel in my pocket. So those are my two choices. I just looked. It's not a quarter, which was my P, not Q for quarter. I must have a nickel. Well, that is valid by what's called a disjunctive syllogism. So we can just say DS, not Nintendo. Just DS, disjunctive syllogism. I either have one or the other. I don't have the one, therefore I have the other. So that one's kind of a common sense one. I will dance at my wedding, or I will cry. Well, I didn't cry, so I danced. This is the same thing. It's just the other side. It's valid by disjunctive syllogism. Why? Because I said one or the other. Just because one, if the other one's no, this one's yes. That's a valid argument. So, give me liberty or give me death. Well, the poor guy died. So that's Q. That's death. Therefore, he got liberty. Well, he died, didn't get liberty. That's invalid. Also doesn't make sense. Okay? Either you're a sinner or you're a saint. Again, you're just assigning P and Q to it. The first thing and the second thing. I'm no saint. That's the second one, so not Q. Therefore, I'm a sinner. Well, that's just like the one at the top. P or Q, not Q, P. That's valid by DS. Disjunctive syllogism. It's one or the other. If it's not one, then it's the other. Totally works. Okay, this one's kind of a tricky one. Sinners are not saints. That's a statement. Okay? But this is really saying, it's really an if-then statement. If you're a sinner, then you're not a saint. So again, not all if-then statements have to be written in if-then form. So we have to kind of change it to that first. If you're a sinner, then you're not a saint. You can actually write that out. You don't have to. I'm no sinner. I'm not a sinner. Sinner is P. I'm a saint. Well, based on what we learned before with the other ones, that is invalid.